the margin of error, MoE, in the INR. It's one of the hidden secrets of medicine that there are margins of error involved, and different tests have different margins of error. Now, back to basics. The word approximately. In a traditional marketplace where they're selling fruit and vegetables, the inspector on the market will have a standard 1 pound or 1 kilogram weight, and he'll check the weights and the scales of the people selling fruit and vegetables. Well, the INR, believe it or not, has a margin of error. And most people think it's small, especially for venous blood. That's where they take a bit of blood from your arm. And most people think that the margin of error is more or less plus or 1.1 of an INR. So 2.5 could be 2.4 or 2.6, but not much different to that. The widely quoted figure in the literature, the research literature, is that the margin of error is 0.5 INR, which means it could be less, it could be more. And the person who's done the most work on this is Favaloro. And for instance, even as you may think, well, that was 20 years ago, but as recently as 2019, they write, evidence continues to show that variability in INR values between laboratories remains unacceptably high. Another source of information are the best practice statements that come out of different hospitals. A widely quoted figure is a ballpark figure is that the margin of error on a blood test is 0.5 INR. Here's a quote. The INR results should be within 0.5. This is when comparing with the venous blood against the CoaguCheck. They're saying the INR results should be within 0.5. Alternatively, the INR results from the patient system can be compared with the results from a quality control POC device used in the practice clinic. The INR results should be within 0.5. In other words, it's industry standard to accept a margin of error of 0.5. And interestingly, these hospitals are actually saying that they now accept the professional version of the CoaguCheck system, which does have a way of checking. I'm coming to that in a minute. So one group of hospitals accept there's an acceptable MoE of 0.5 INR. And they think that the professional POC, professional CoaguCheck machine, is as good as venous blood. Most doctors in practice trust only the labs. NB. When comparing lab against the CoaguCheck personal machine, sometimes the lab gives a higher INR, sometimes it's lower. You can't take your own machine and calibrate it against the lab based on one test result. Sometimes the lab is higher, sometimes it's lower. In addition, the difference for a low INR will probably be smaller than the difference for a high INR. But for a high INR, a difference of 0.5 or 0.8 INR doesn't really matter because there's not much difference between 4 and 5 between 5 and 6. So a higher degree of precision is not usually required. Decisions about an INR of greater than 5 are similar to decisions about an INR of greater than 6. What are some of the reasons for venous blood errors? Strange as it may seem, the INR itself has not been precisely defined. Now, the reasons are very technical, they're beyond even me, but it's not the same as the meter, kilogram, second, these units, or not the same even as the kilogram weight which is taken around the marketplace. The INR has not been precisely defined. Then there's quite a bit of variability between labs and the machines, even in the same establishment. Then, of course, there are the notorious human factors and the circumstances. For instance, the person taking the blood can very easily get the amount of blood wrong in the tube, and the concentration of citrate in the test tube can affect the INR. Sometimes you get underfilled tubes which give higher INR. And then there's the time to the lab, and there are other human factors. And if you want a reference to pursue your interest in venous blood errors, here's one for you. There are more. When we look at the QuagoCheck system, we see a natural suspicion of home machines. Well, all doctors are always suspicious of what patients use. Non-professionals use them, therefore it must be suspicious. And how can smaller home equipment be more trustworthy than a large hospital laboratory? In support of home machines, the test strips are made at one factory in Britain or America or whatever, and they have strict test controls on them, and one place at least provides one standard that everyone is using. And the tests that have been done show that the margin of error on these test strips is less than 2%. The test strips are used in all the machines, and all the machines carry out internal calibration checks with each test strip. The human factors of getting the venous blood and so on are made easier by doing a finger prick system. And the technique for obtaining the right size drop of blood and placing it on the strip has to be mastered. It's a little bit more difficult than the diabetes checks. And if you don't get it right, you get a wasted strip. So patients who do self-testing tend to develop a habit and a routine, which again builds into a good, faithful result system. A test also takes less than 5 minutes. The human factors are low, and the result is automated. The largest problems, in my personal view, are cold fingers or damp fingers after washing them properly in warm water. There are other advantages of self-testing and self-dosing. The main thing is that a patient can test when needed. Now, can you imagine this is especially important with old people who perhaps cannot easily leave the house. If the old person is shaking with their fingers, it's easy enough to get someone to help them. Then a patient can take the machine on holidays and at weekends when doctors are unavailable. And of course, there's the usual problem that a doctor is not always available when you want them. And I would like to conclude with a major point. A major, rarely discussed reason for a bad INR is when you go off your food. By bad INR, I mean out of range. If you half eat, if you self-fast, then that does change the INR and can do so quite quickly, actually, I've found. Now, if a self-dozer starts going off their food, they can immediately self-test. As a general principle, usually a lack of food increases the INR, but it only needs a patient to be off their food and then to hit holidays and then to hit the queue and can't get an appointment for venous blood. It can take several days to get an INR test done at the local GP, instead of having the problem dealt with promptly, which is probably one reason why self-testers and self-dosers are more likely to stay in range than relying on venous blood samples.